What's it all about? Why are we here? Is there a God? What happens when we die? In this series, I'm talking to public figures about these questions. Like me, none of them claims to be a religious expert, but all of them have, at times, had cause to think about the meaning of life. Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us. And our guest this time is Joanne O'Riordan, by far and away the youngest participant ever in our program, at 20 years of age, but an awful lot packed into the 20 years so far between taking on our government over disability benefit reductions, special address to the United Nations in New York, starring in a video of your own life and times, and halfway through a degree course in UCC. Not bad going so far, and lots of other things as well. But I was specially asked to ask you, Joanne, about this obsession of yours with bourbon cream biscuits. What's that all about?
Okay, I'm obsessed with bourbon creams, and everyone always says that they're old biscuits, and a young person like me shouldn't be obsessed with such old biscuits. So my response was that bourbon creams are classy and that they're the gay burn of biscuits. Because they're classy, because you're a classy man yourself.
The gay burn of biscuits? Well, that's the greatest compliment that has ever been paid to me.
I'm upset because I forgot my bourbon creams. We could have
Thank you so
snacked.
much, Joanne. I beat you to it because at the end of this interview, I have a special presentation for you of bourbon cream biscuits. So there, we got in.
I can retire. I can just
You can
retire
retire.
happily.
Let us start with the important things. April 1996 in Erindale Hospital in Cork, Joanne O'Riordan was born with a very, very rare condition called Tetra-amelia. Explain, please.
Well, Tetra-amelia is basically a condition where you're born without all of your limbs. It happens to only one of 7 people in the world, which is pretty cool. We're all a unique group, I suppose, at the end of the day. But there's actually no medical reason as to why it happened. I suppose really at the time it wasn't ever heard of a child ever being born missing an arm, a leg. So for a child to be born with no limbs, it was just an incredible thing. And what's even cooler is that I get to meet all the nurses that looked after me in the hospital, and they were like, you were just as loud as every other baby. My father was actually the first person to see me, and he always says that he literally went into the room and, all the children are lined up, and he said that he walked over to one cot and he just said, I don't know, it's the father's thing. He was just drawn over to the cot, and the nurse came in and Dad was like, is this Joanne? And the nurse was like, spot on, you found her.
And how much did you learn about how much they knew about your condition before you were born?
They only found out 9 weeks before I was born, just through a random scan. What's nice as well about my parents is that although they were told, you could just put Joanne away, a doctor was saying to my mother that Joanne is like an old doll. Like once you get sick of it, there's the house you can put her into. In other words, they wanted to put me in a home and forget about me. But my mother said no to that. I remember 2 weeks after I was born, she brought me down to a sports day where my sister was running, and she literally tossed me around to every other mother that was doting, being like, oh, isn't Joanne cute? And my mother was like, do you want to hold her? But it got everyone to grips, so I suppose, with Joanne instead of the girl with no limbs, and that's all she's wanted really ever since my birth.
Now, you have 3 brothers, Dennis, Danny, and Stephen, and your big sister is Gillian. And during your childhood and rearing and so on, they all pretty well mucked in, I presume, to give a hand.
Give a hand, yeah, they gave more than a hand. Dennis, my eldest brother, we were obsessed with WWE and World Wrestling Entertainment, and Dennis decided, because I was a nice petite human being, that he could try all the moves on me. Dennis forgot that he was 5'10", and he threw me into the air about to catch me, but we were under a light, and I hit my face off the chandelier, came crashing down, and I lost a tooth. So that's treating a girl as normally as you possibly can. But we all treat each other normally. Myself and Danny, we play PlayStation all the time, and myself and Gillian, I suppose, we're the tomboys, really. We go to football matches, watching ladies football, and just hang out, I suppose. And then Stephen, we go to concerts and have a bit of crack. So, yeah.
My understanding of it is that there is one other girl one other woman in Birmingham, Tina Stark, with the same Tetra-amelia. Your mother and you went to visit Tina Stark to get some help to see how she was getting on and what help she had and so on. And you brought back a video of her and the help that she was getting. And armed with that, you went on Kenny Live with Pat. And arising out of that, what happened?
We raised so much money out of that. I don't know the exact figure, but I know it was a substantial amount. And I know people from all walks of life actually donated.
So what did all this money do for you?
My family actually built another house in Mill Street. We were living at the time in Dernagree, my father's home place, which was a very stereotypical rural cottage. But in terms of wheelchair access, it wasn't great. The house is adapted basically for me. The hall's be a bit wider so that if I went down the hall, said, oh, I forgot something in the kitchen, I wouldn't have to back into a room, turn there and then go out.
Before that, what sort of things did people try to make for you to help you?
Yeah, there was a lot of things being made by the rehab in Dunleary. They were kind of great in everything that they did. My parents always, the first thing they wanted was to get me sitting upright because they didn't want me lying on my back for the rest of my life. So they made a thing we nicknamed called the flower pot. So I sat into the flower pot and I was able to sit up with all my siblings. Then my parents were inspired from that and they got... I suppose it's legs on a board kind of made, and I sat into the legs and I was able to, I suppose, move my hips back and forward, and that's how I actually walked then across. And my mother saw me taking a step and she said, that's it, Joanne can have a chair now, that's fine. My brothers and I used to always challenge each other on PlayStation growing up. So when I went into the warehouse to pick up the wheelchair, they were told, my parents were told, Joanne will never be able to drive the chair. And because I played the games and I knew how to work kind of joysticks and analogues, my parents sat me into the chair and they said, this is how you move. I pushed that forward and I drove out the warehouse. So yeah, I proved them wrong, I could drive.
This goes forward, reverse, right, left, and it lifts and it goes, it rises and goes.
It does everything you need to go. It actually goes at 10 kilometres an hour. It's such a dinky yoke, and what's perfect about the chair is that it suits my size.
I saw you using the phone, Joanne. I was fascinated. You clamped it between your shoulder and your jawbone and you could get to it that way.
Yeah. It looks ridiculous, but I put the phone up my shoulder, I turn my head, and with my upper lip, I actually hit all the keys. So I didn't notice it until I watched the documentary, but I look like a rabbit whenever my mouth's going up and down.
Was it a particularly Catholic family that you lived in? I mean, was the family rosary every day, holy pictures of the wall, mass every Sunday, that kind of thing?
We definitely went to mass every Sunday. 11 o'clock, I always remember hating it. I always remember...
Hating it?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it was on, like, this was so 3-year-old me. It was on during goals on Sunday because I was a football fan. And I was like, can mass not be earlier? And my mother was like, we can get up at 9:30 if you want. I was like, no, 11 o'clock is fine. You know, the wheelchair spot was front row, which was even worse. So, you know, you kind of had to sit there and pretend to be looking at the priest, nodding in agreement, even though my mind was actually miles away. I remember one day I came out and I asked my mother, I was like, I don't see the point of me going to mass anymore. I'm just not focusing anymore. And she was like, what are you thinking about? I was like, I don't know, just life in general. And she was like, oh, when I go into mass, you know, it's actually a half an hour for me to actually get away from everything that's going on. And then I was like, fair enough, I'm not the only one. So yeah, that's when I suppose then I was like, I don't think I need to go to a church for half an hour.
You never thought of saying a prayer for your condition, or that things might improve, or a miracle, or...
No, everything for me was always actually really good. Internally, I always never treated myself differently, and I always said that for me life was kind of like a game of poker, and I just dealt with the deck that I was given, and that was basically it for me. I never prayed for anything to change me physically.
Okay, so now we come to the stage where you're about to do mock intersearch, and you develop this crush on Enda Kenny. Enda Kenny? You developed a crush on Enda Kenny. That's okay. Why did you fall in love with Enda Kenny?
Falling in love is really dramatic about it. I remember he came on the TV. I must have been really young. I remember saying to my mother, I don't know who that guy is, but he's got great hair. And his hair, it was fantastic.
His hair?
Yeah.
Enda Kenny's hair.
Do you ever just notice, if it's it could be the windiest day in the south of Ireland, and Enda Kenny's hair, there wouldn't be a rib out of place.
Fine, so you arranged to meet him?
Yeah, we were doing filming for local television in general. You know, big day, future Taoiseach is coming, you know, oh my God, what's going on? And yeah, weirdly enough, he came. And stupidly, instead of going, oh, I wonder, what's in his hair, I went, what are you going to do to protect people with disabilities? That was literally the first question.
Good for you. And he said...
And then he made the promise that he wasn't going to touch any of the benefits, any of the needs, any of the care for people with disabilities. And he promised me faithfully. He did the Indokinny hen thing where he kind of slices in your general direction. And yeah, I took that as like, one of those like, pinky promises, I suppose. And we both went on our merry way, I suppose.
And then the election, and then they got into power. And guess one of the first things they did, Joanne?
Yeah, I remember I was in school. I was doing a BT Young Scientist project with my friend. And the phone rang, and it was, Joanne, your mother's in the office again. I went up and she was like, oh, I got to take you out of school. I was like, oh, what's wrong? Thinking it was a family emergency. She was like, Indokinny has actually cut the disability allowance. I was like, oh, really? Like, being like, no, maybe it's just a rumour, politics and rumours and stuff like that. So we went in, we heard the news, he cut the budget. What was really lucky for us was that we were given the tape by our local television of Joanne meeting Indokinny and him promising me, I promise
never do
I
that.
wouldn't do that. And, it doesn't take great investigative journalism.
So then you took yourself onto the Late Late Show with Ryan Tubridy to announce this.
Yeah, it was kind of cool because I suppose the first instance was I wrote a public letter to Indokinny explaining how, like, I wasn't even just talking about me in general. Like, there's like hundreds of thousands of me that this was going to affect. And I said, before you make the cut, think of the effect it's going to have, the lives it's going to change, and the lives it could potentially end for a lot of people. And of course, we had the tape as well. And then, he reversed the cut. I suppose in Ireland, if you bash a politician and succeed well, you're a bit of a phenomenon for a while. So I was invited to Ryan Tubridy, and I remember when I went on, he said that he didn't want to do the Joanne O'Riordan versus Indokinny thing. He'd like to get to know who Joanne O'Riordan was.
So arising out of that session with Ryan on the Late Late Show, someone in the United Nations had seen you and invited you to New York to address the United Nations. Is that so?
Yeah, on the Late Late Show, I said that technology was the limb I never had. And that was my key motto, I suppose, from that little second. But there was an Irish guy in Geneva called Paul Keneally watching the Late Late Show that night, like every good Irish person would do, I suppose. And he picked up on it, and he was holding a Women in Technology conference, because that's a huge problem in America at the moment, trying to get women involved in technology.
And they gave you a terrific reception.
I was the first person in the United Nations to get a standing ovation.
Yeah.
So it was actually a pretty cool achievement.
You've become a spokesperson now for disabled people. Is that how you see yourself?
I'd like to see myself as an advocate if I can.
An advocate, yes.
I think it's definitely a nice role to have, and it's a role that has brought me everything I've had so far, so I can't really turn it away. And it's actually, I go to meet people every day. I give talks every day about my life and how my life has transformed. And I suppose as well as being a disability advocate, weirdly enough, I became like a poster girl for mental health and how to overcome barriers and stuff like that. A lot of people, mental health wasn't talked about really when I first started with disability. So it was really nice then for people to invite me then to all of these events. And I suppose I talked about my life, and people would say I've become inspiring, which I kind of shy away from because I'm just a normal 20-year-old at the end of the day.
You're not.
So, well, doing random things. I like to say I'm an ordinary person doing extraordinary things.
So arising out of all that, Joanne, what feelings have you now about this thing of celebrity, personality, advocate, spokesperson, whatever, and fame and recognition being thrust upon you?
I wouldn't see myself as a celebrity, to be honest. A lot of my friends wouldn't. If you met them tomorrow morning and you were like, is Joanne a celebrity? They'd laugh back in your face and say, she's not a celebrity. She does really cool things and she gets freebies and we're jealous. And that's the only time they'll ever admit that I'm a celebrity is if I'm able to bypass a queue, if I'm able to get a free iPhone, or if I'm able to walk into a room and Niall Horan's there without getting tackled. That's the only time they'll ever admit that I'm a celebrity.
Now, you're on record as saying that one day you would like to be married and have a child yourself.
Yeah.
And if suppose, like your mother, you were warned at some stage, and I just interject here, at the time your mother was told about you at 9 weeks, that they actually went out, is it so that they went out and looked at a grave for you?
There wasn't a chance that I would survive out of the womb in general. They didn't know. They didn't know anything really at all about the condition. And my parents, ironically, we live across from the graveyard now. The reason they picked that particular grave was because the sunlight happened to shine on that one plot of ground. And they were like, that's where we want Joanne to be buried. And that's actually the plot of ground that the sun only shines on in the graveyard. So yeah, that's where they picked.
So they were pretty certain you wouldn't live very long.
But no one knew. No one knew, was it physical? No one knew, was it in, like, you know, was it in the brain maybe that the condition was? Nobody knew, was it fatal? Nobody knew, was it not? And yeah, I think I defied everyone's expectations, so yeah.
And if you were going to have a baby and you found out, Joanne, that she had the same condition as you have, would you have an abortion?
Honestly, not for me. It's not my choice. But I wouldn't deny the choice to any other woman at the same time. I wouldn't do it simply because I know what it's like to be born with no limbs, and I know the positives that you can have on it. A lot of the time, if you go to the doctor, and this is probably critiquing them more than anything else, and maybe society as a general, if you're told that your child is going to be born with a disability, a lot of the time you're told of the negative aspects of it. You're told, this child is going to have so much care. This child is going to cost you hundreds of thousands. This child is going to be a burden on the state. This child is going to be blah, blah, blah. What the doctors or society don't tell you is this child is going to fulfill your life. This child is going to love you just as much as any other child would love you. And I think at the end of the day, if people were given the advice, properly, I would feel personally that maybe disability and abortions would actually decrease, because I know at the moment there's a high rate of Down syndrome babies being aborted and stuff, and it's horrible to hear. But when I hear the way medical terms are thrown about children with disabilities, it's kind of separating them as a person. You know, what's inside you, the way the doctors describe it is that it's not a person anymore. It's a thing growing inside you that will die. And I don't really like how doctors portray it. But at the same time, I wouldn't deny anyone the right if they do want to get an abortion, because society's expectations and everything else, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And thankfully, my parents were mentally able to cope with it all, to be honest. And there's not a lot of people out there that are mentally able to cope with it.
I'm pushing you a little bit because of this controversy at the moment about abortion being allowed in the case of fatal fetal abnormality, which is almost how you were described before you were born.
Kind of. And at the same time, when we look back on it, there wasn't much research done on children with no limbs.
No.
Children with no limbs actually aren't fatal. They just have no limbs. You know, that's the only problem. And I think that's the problem sometimes with doctors in medicine, is that once they see a problem with your child, immediately they're thinking the worst case scenario. You know, immediately their mind is flicking towards, you know, the chances are now this child won't survive. You know, it's better for you now to save yourself the heartache and whatnot. And as I said, if people may use the right language, if people may look at the pros as well as the cons, there's cons to everything in life. But if you look at the positives, and if you look at the fact that this is a child at the end of the day that wants a mother, that wants to be nourished like everyone else, loved, cared and whatnot, and supported, I think then it's pretty easy to make up your mind.
So what are you saying to me? It comes down to the individual mother.
I think mothers have to be trusted. They really do know best at the end of the day. My mother knew best for me. She knew she didn't know if I was going to be like this. She didn't know I was going to be doing things like this 100%. But, you know, she knew that I'd be strong-hearted and strong-willed, and that's that.
Okay. Back to college, criminology, and 2 years to go or thereabouts for your degree. Why criminology?
This brand new course, this brand new shiny thing came out in UCC called criminology. And I remember the professor sent me over a bunch of slideshows. And I remember reading it and I was like, this is interesting. You know, if I want to do journalism, this will give me a nice new perspective, really, on how to view society. So I accepted the scholarship and I went in and I started doing criminology, and I've actually never looked back. It's one of the most interesting things you'll ever do in your entire life. It's so interesting.
When it comes to exams and things in university, are you given some slack? Because you were talking about time.
Yeah, time in general. Slack educationally, I'm held to the same standards as everyone else.
Quite.
I get 10 minutes extra per hour in an exam. I get to write the exam myself using a laptop. So I type with a pen in my mouth and stab off the keys like a Woody Woodpecker kind of motion.
Now, back to other topics, and that is all of that teaching which you got from the lovely nuns in junior school and secondary school and all of that. And you said you started questioning when you were 13 or 14, which seems remarkably young to me. Is there any of that religion or belief or faith left And if so, to what extent?
There's certain aspects, I suppose, left. I always believe that there's someone always watching over me, always. I'd like to think that maybe, is it a guardian angel? And if it is a guardian angel, would it be my grandparents who have passed?
Are you saying that you feel this as a presence?
I wouldn't say a presence, but I always kind of feel that if something bad if something happens in life that's wrong for me, I always feel that there's someone there to put you on the right path, and I always believe that everything happens for a reason. My mother used to always say that she always felt that my grandfather would watch over me. He was a mad Fine Gaeler, and when I did the Inda Kenny thing, she was always like, he's either turning or smiling, one of the two.
And what about Jesus? Who or what was he to you now?
Very good man. He was a man of miracles. Jesus could always heal disabled people. I remember always focusing on that, and I was like, why is he healing disabled people? You know, people are in need of healing. It's not disabled people.
Do you think he was divine, as in the Son of God?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. It's hard to know. I suppose I like having physical things to base facts off of. I like there being concrete proof as to why we're on the planet. You know, I do like that as well.
Do you have a down day, Joanne?
I do. I'm a 20-year-old at the end of the day. I do have down days like everyone else, definitely. But ironically enough, literally last weekend, it wasn't a good weekend. I think sports-wise, it was a collapse completely. And I remember everything was just failing me. Every team I touched lost. And I remember I turned to one of the girls. I was like, you know what? Suffering is so bad, I'm just going to laugh. And she was like, that's the spirit. Laugh at your suffering. And that's literally how I always was taught, not to take myself too seriously. And that's always what I did when I had a bad day. I used to always wake up the following morning and laugh. I feel like that was hilarious, you know.
Do you feel angry at God?
No. As I said, I always believed that there was a reason as to why I was put on the earth. Hopefully I'm fulfilling that reason, maybe.
So do you pray?
I don't actually pray, but I would say that I'm spiritual. I kind of would say thanks, you know, if something good went right.
To whom and what?
I actually don't know who I say thanks to, which, you know, you kind of look up and you'd say, thanks very much for that one. You know, it could be just a lucky day. You could find a fiver on the ground. You could, you know, end up speaking at the United Nations. Who knows?
Well, if you think there's somebody looking after you like your grandfather, what do you think happens when we die? Does the light go off, finished, done, that's it? Or do you join your loved ones again?
I'd like to think that we never end. I'd like to think there's...
You say you like to think.
I'd like to think that it wouldn't be the end.
That?
I always said actually to my mother, and it wasn't even just like a case of in case I die. I always said that if I was going to die, burn, like obviously, you know, burn my ashes, and then I want to be planted as a tree. You know, and I always wanted to, you know, be a tree for someone, you know, and be a tree of hope. I don't know. I always thought that was nice when people were, you know, reincarnated into windows, when their ashes were used, or when they were thrown into the coral reef to feed the fish and stuff like that. I always thought stuff like that was nice because you're technically still there, I suppose, just in a different way.
So do you think you will see your loved ones, perhaps your grandfather?
I don't know. I'd like to think that I would.
And is there any semblance of a wish? Beethoven said when he realized he was very deaf, he said, "In heaven I will hear again." Yeah. And if you get to heaven, if you ever think of going to heaven, do you think you will be in heaven with arms and legs? Does that ever cross your mind?
If I'm being honest, I could never envision myself with arms and legs.
Oh.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to describe what I'd look like with arms and legs. You know, even when I look at my siblings, you know, I'm like, I wonder what I look like that. And then I'm like, nah, completely not. You know, I don't have a clue what I'd look like with arms or legs. So, you know, if I do ascend into the clouds and, you know, if I come out with arms and legs, I'll be a bit freaked out probably at first because all I've known is living with no limbs. But I don't know. I'd like to think that I'd like to be accepted as without the limbs, because that's how I've lived. So
in the end then, for you, Joanne, what is the meaning of life?
To me, as long as you fulfill whatever you were on this earth to do, to be honest. And I think everyone finds their niche at the end of the day. If you were meant to just clean streets, if you were meant to write music, if you were meant to advocate, if you were meant to play football, I don't know. As long as you feel that you fulfill that, it's kind of like asking someone what's the definition of success. Success is basically what it is to that person. And I think that's the meaning of life. It's different for every person. For me, it's being able to stand up and say, personally, yes, I became a journalist. I did a damn good job as well. I'm delighted with myself. It's also being able to say that I help people and I was able to encourage people to be who they are and proud of who they are and where they come from. And once I do all that, then for me, I'm fulfilled, and then my meaning of life then is done.
in feeling all of that way, it is astounding to me that never at any stage according to yourself, did you ever think, why me?
Never.
Never?
Never. I was probably really fortunate that no one ever looked at me with that, like, you know, closely. In a close circle of friends, no one would ever look and go, poor Joanne, you know, not on a Monday, Sundays. They're actually the first people, if I ever had a problem, they'd say, would you shut up? You know, stop whinging, you know, and that's it, you know. And a lot of people will be like, God, that's very harsh to them, isn't it? But I don't want people having pity around me. I don't want people tiptoeing around me. I want people, you know, that would tell me to cop on if necessary, or stop with your ego and whatnot. And to be honest, you know, I think it is what it is, you know, and you can't really change it. As I said, it's like a game of poker. You know, this is the hand I've been dealt with. It's up to me now. Either I'm doing a damn good job at bluffing, or else I'm, you know, holding a good flush here.
Last question. If everything you were told by the nuns is true, all of that catechism and all of that theology, and that you eventually end up at the Golden Gates and you meet God,
Yep.
What will Joanne say to God?
I'll say thanks very much. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Obviously, my time is up. And I'd like to imagine myself in my wheelchair going through the big Golden Gates, revving it up at 10 kilometres an hour, beeping the horn, passing it with a big salute. That's always how I imagined it, and that's how I hope it is. And yeah, hopefully that's the way it happens. And hopefully he has chicken nuggets.
That'll be it.
That'll be it.
I now present you, with great pleasure, with a special packet of bourbon cream.
This is it. The gay bird of biscuits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and well done.